So I am Ellen Austin Lee, an alum and current grad assistant of LaSalle University's Solstice Master in Fine Arts in Creative Writing program. Welcome to the sixth in a series of 7 evening readings taking place here in Auburndale, Mass. As part of our January 2025 10-day residency, the start of our spring semester. For tonight's reading, first up, we'll have Solstice Fiction, Creative Nonfiction, and Writing for Young People faculty member, David Yoo, who will be introduced by second semester fiction student, Shane Dowling. Then we will have Solstice Poetry and Social Action Writing Track, or SOT, faculty at large, Kathleen Aguero, introduced by fourth semester poetry student, Eric Armstrong. We'll conclude with fiction faculty member, Gina Chung, who will be introduced by third semester fiction student, Louis Lasavita. Shane, come up to the mic.
Good evening. This past semester was my first in the Solstice program, during which I had the terrific opportunity to work with David Yoo. I was first introduced to David with his hilarious reading of his memoir, The Choke Artist, in the spring, which ended up being the first book I bought at the residency. After enjoying his class on dialogue, I was excited when he became my mentor, if a bit tentative only because I had not had the opportunity to speak with him about the 2 ideas I was considering for my manuscript. But fortunately, all my hesitations were dashed as soon as I did so. He encouraged me to try out my mixed martial arts novel due to its smaller scale, even though I had more ideas for my fantasy series. When I followed his advice, it didn't take long for me to see its wisdom. My current passion switched from my fantasy concept back to my MMA one, and a flood of new ideas sprang forth, though getting them quickly and succinctly onto the page was a different story. David assisted me greatly in that aspect and many others. His feedback was always considerate and tremendously helpful in alleviating my weaknesses, as well as in encouraging my unique strengths as a writer. He answered my questions at length and was always happy to elaborate when asked for clarification. Thanks to him, I was able to not only amend my submitted work, but also meld those lessons into my writing moving forward. David earned his bachelor's at Skidmore College and an MA in creative writing from the University of Colorado Boulder. His first published book was Girls for Breakfast on May 24th, 2005. It was a New York Public Library Books for the Teenage selection, a book sense pick, as well as a Reading Rant's Top 10 Books for Teens choice. His second young adult novel, Stop Me If You've Heard This One Before, came about 3 years and 4 months later and was a Chicago Best of the Best selection and appeared in the Bloomsbury Review's Editor's Favorites of 2008. His middle grade novel, The Detention Club, was published in 2011, and his autobiographical essay collection, The Choke Artist, arrived a year later, both to very positive reviews. He's contributed to many anthologies such as Guys Write for Guys Read and Open Mic. Like most of his works, the latter collection is tied together by humor, and Michael Cart of Booklist notes his story, Becoming Henry Lee, is the funniest one of the bunch. David has written as a columnist for Core Magazine, formerly Coram Journal, the first and most widely circulated English-language monthly magazine for Asian Americans. Additionally, he has published both fiction and nonfiction in Maryland Review, Massachusetts Review, and Rush Hour. He lives in Massachusetts and teaches fiction at the Gotham Writers Workshop. It is my pleasure to introduce David Yoo for tonight's reading. Please join me in welcoming him.
Did I mess up, right? Thank you, Shane, for that great introduction. I loved working with you this semester and with Sister Allison and Caroline. I'm going to read a chapter from this novel. I'm actually going to dedicate it. I never dedicate readings because I always anticipate it going poorly and figure who wants a piece of crap dedicated to them. But I'm going to dedicate this reading to my students in my workshop this week, who I'm having a great time working with. Okay. The frustrating thing about taking an honors course at Redfield High was that there weren't many good-looking girls in honors classes. 80% of the reason I was considered the type of student who would take honors classes was because I was Korean. and Asian Americans have a reputation for being brainiacs. The other 20% was because of my well-publicized knack for making posters. I was so good that in 8th grade, my social studies teacher submitted one to a national contest, and I received honorable mention. It made the Renfield news and everything. As a result, during the summer before freshman year, the guidance counselor insisted I sign up for honors courses across the board, so I did. My parents assumed I'd been hit by an intelligence ray as well, but eventually I proved them all wrong. At first, this was a source of pride for me. I was almost defiant about how stupid and therefore not nerdy or typically Asian I was. But a month into freshman year, I realized I was on track to receive 2 C's and 1 D. When my parents saw my first few quiz scores, they were upset, but assumed I simply hadn't studied enough. Their faulty analysis proved to be worthy alibi. There was a distinct possibility I was a genius. I just didn't apply myself. Then again, maybe I really was a moron. This is why I started cheating incessantly. I was forced to by my family and my school just to maintain a shred of academic dignity. The night before a quiz, I cut out a square paper no larger than my thumb, then filled both sides with formulas or definitions and declensions using a mechanical pencil and a magnifying glass in order to write smaller. Spending hours miniaturizing the facts burned the formulas into my brain, so I rarely ended up using the cheat sheets. I reasoned I wasn't really cheating at all then. I just preferred studying by writing information down on really small pieces of paper. During second semester, I got caught peeking at crib sheets twice. In Latin class, the teacher stood behind me for almost a minute before asking loudly, as if she was Gollum, "What has he got under his cupped hand?" I feebly replied, "He has nothing." She wrote a large X across my quiz and sat back down at her desk. Instead of focusing on academics, I put all my energy into trying to make the JV soccer team. I endured Giles, the senior soccer bully, at practice throughout the fall for one simple reason. Renfield girls love upper-class soccer players, and I dreamed of eventually being a 12th grade soccer player, which I knew held serious cachet among the ladies. The football team was a travesty, having failed to secure a winning season in over 2 decades, while the varsity boys soccer team had amassed 5 Class S state championships in as many years, prompting newscasters and journalists in the state of Connecticut to regard Renfield's soccer team as a dynasty, which in all truth it was. It was a status symbol to date a soccer player. It was a status symbol to even be seen talking to a soccer player. It was a status symbol to wear a soccer player's varsity jacket. Come to think of it, I didn't really care about playing time or how the team was actually doing. I did it all for the jacket. It's silly how excited I was for it because girls still couldn't care less that I played soccer. Nothing overrode the fact that I was a lowly, frosh Asian guy. Besides, I only got to wear my jacket for 2 days. It didn't make me cry, but my throat knotted up when one day before homeroom, Giles grabbed my jacket by the zipper and broke it. And then the next morning finished the job by literally cutting the hood off with a thick pair of scissors while I was still wearing the damn thing. At night, I daydream about the chiseled me returning home from the army in 10 years and visiting Giles at the local Sunoco where surely he'd work at and giving him a brain-damaging thrashing, which would land me 20 years in the stockade. Then I'd get released, immediately track the now vegetable Giles down and beat the crap out of his catatonic ass all over again. The soccer coach was the freshman science teacher, and for the first couple of months, he playfully picked on me since Keith Kagas and I were the only soccer players in class. It was obvious the other students were a little jealous. But then the soccer season ended, and by late October, I'd scored a 32% and a 19% on the first 2 practicums of the semester, and the playful tone altered slightly. "Park, point out the cortex on the overhead," he said one winter afternoon. I walked up to the projection screen and stared at the image from the slide projector, feigning intelligence for almost 30 seconds. "Listen, I don't know if this is appropriate material for the students. I could show you where the cortex is, but it's kind of perverted," I said, shrugging. "Maybe you'll crack open your textbook for the first time in detention," he said. "I'd make you stand in the corner, but technically you're too old for that." My mom was still at work when I hijacked the mid-semester warnings in the mail. I received warnings from all 6 of my teachers informing my parents that I was failing their classes. Fortunately, parents didn't need to sign the slips, so I crumpled them into 5 tiny balls, or 6, and chucked them into the woods behind the house. Then I went into the woods, retrieved them, and threw them deeper. I'd always assumed Kagas was a meathead, but he turned out to be one of the top students in science class. It was also the one class I shared that year with Jamie Ginsberg. She was a new student from Michigan and one of the only hot girls in the Brainiac courses. Her dark brown hair was cut short, and she had the most amazing bubble butt I'd ever seen. There were stools for seats in science, and when she leaned forward, I could make out the perfectly symmetrical curve of both buns. When she'd turn around, I'd pretend my contact lenses were irritating me, and I'd squint at the wall behind her. One day in November, the teacher showed everyone a picture of his wife, a forestry management worker, standing next to a tree sheet bandaged, and I said, "Oh, stop. Jesus, please stop. You're giving me a Woody dicot." No one laughed at my science-based joke, and I admit it fell far below my usual standards, but Jamie actually rolled her eyes, and she said out loud, "Only Nick." Just that, only Nick. This gave me hope since I figured I was leagues more popular than everyone else in class except for Kagas, whom I felt I was tied with because we both played soccer. Everyone kept the same seating arrangement except me because I was always late for class. One day toward the end of November, I sat down on a stool in the back before realizing I was right next to Jamie. I'd never sat next to her before. I avoided looking at her, fearful she'd kindly ask me to move to another seat. I casually prayed for a miracle, something I could work with. The teacher started writing instructions on the chalkboard. "Do you want to work with me on this lab?" Jamie asked me. "I guess." I tried to sound indifferent, but my voice cracked. It hadn't in 2 years. The lab was a joke, which I was grateful for. I actually understood what was going on. It was a little experiment using microscopes, examining samples of blood for something. I focused extra hard in order to do it right and not prove to be an idiot. We exchanged a few words during this part of the experiment. I feverishly thought of something witty to say, but my mind had turned to lead. Then came a kiss from the gods. The teacher said, "Okay, which one of you is brave enough to draw your own blood?" Instantly, I raised my hand, even though the mere mention of blood had made me dizzy. "Hart, you sure you can do this?" "Of course," I said. "It's not dangerous, is it?" "We've only lost 2 students to this experiment in over 10 years, he joked. Everyone laughed uneasily. "Nick's got the worst grade in class, so that probably means he's expendable, right?" Kagas asked. "Here's the razor." Coach handed me a brand new flat razor wrapped in a tiny strip of cardboard. I slipped the razor out of its sheath, shiny and sharp. No prob. It dawned on me how easy this was. Just poke a tiny hole in your index finger. Anyone can do it. It wouldn't hurt or anything. Everyone was staring at my finger, and I hammed it up, holding the blade in the light above me, inspecting the edge, turning it over in my hand. A couple of students laughed. I brought the razor down and down. It came to a rest maybe a millimeter from the soft pink bubble of skin on the tip of my index finger. In my brain, I wanted to do it. I was doing it, but the hand holding the razor wasn't responding. I couldn't look at Jamie. This was too humiliating. "Okay, Nick, looks like you bit off more than you can chew. Anyone else think they can do it? And this time, all you wimps out there can keep your hands down." Kagas raised his hand. The teacher handed him a fresh blade, and I could tell from the look on Kagas's face that he had total confidence in himself and would succeed. I think right then I noticed something weird about Kagas. He was my friend, yet he always tried to make me look like an ass. Everyone redirected their eyes toward him, not me, and even Jamie's mouth was slightly askew, almost wincing at the sight of Kagas gripping the blade. I shouted, "Wait, I'll do it," and gritted my teeth while plunging the razor down a little too fast on my innocent index finger. Minutes later, Coach was explaining to the school nurse that I'd employed a slashing motion with the razor. Apparently, this must have cut an artery because there was more than enough blood for the demonstration. I felt dizzy. Jamie gaped at me as if I was demented, and I kept asking her, "Did I beat him? Did Kagas do it before me? Where am I?" For the rest of the week, Jamie addressed me in the halls with phrases like, "Hey, psycho," and sometimes she made a stabbing motion reminiscent of Anthony Perkins in a wig. I'd laugh, do the motion back to her, and she'd give me a tense smile. One day toward the end of fall semester, I walked with confidence into the cafeteria during study hall and sat down right next to Jamie. She was sitting with Maggie Shaughnessy and Missy Means. Jamie nodded and smiled at me before continuing her conversation. I looked around to see if anyone had noticed me sitting with them. Question, Wang Chung Park, a voice roared. It was Giles, standing at the double-door frame of the cafeteria, wearing a Whalers practice jersey and stonewashed jeans with matching premeditated rips at the knees. Technically, it wasn't my name, so I ignored him. Is it time for everybody to have fun tonight? Seriously, bud, is it time for everybody to Nick Park tonight? He cackled and walked off, singing his version of the chorus. Conversation started up again, and I silently prayed Jamie had somehow not heard him. The best way to get someone to forget that they've heard you get slurred is to look like you've forgotten about it yourself. So I immediately started sketching an impressive-looking mansion. I'd drawn the very same one so many times I could do it with my eyes closed. How's science? Missy asked Jamie. My ears perked up. It's okay. Kind of boring. Well, except for crazy guy over here, she said. Nick's nuts, Maggie added, flicking a used straw at me. What's that about my nuts? I asked. You didn't finish your sentence. She stared at me with her mouth open. How's your finger anyway? Missy asked. How had she known about it? Then I realized Jamie must have told her. She talked about me. Oh, it's fine. How's yours? They stared politely at me for a few seconds. Then Missy turned back to Jamie, and they promptly forgot I was sitting there. I mentally cursed myself. Missy started complaining about how scratchy her shoulder pads were, and I went back to work on my mansion with a goofy smile on my face. Tomorrow's my last day with Brandy in 7th period, Missy said. I wish I was in that, Jamie complained. There aren't any hotties in science. Well, I guess there's Keith, but he doesn't count. He's more like my brother. I always thought he was, Missy babbled on, but there was a roaring in my ears, and I couldn't hear them anymore, so eventually I stopped listening. I sat there for a few minutes and realized they weren't going to talk to me again. Jamie didn't even notice that I had mentally switched my brain from stun to kill and was giving her a death ray stare. I excused myself to get a drink. I hunched over the water fountain, slurping away, even though I wasn't thirsty. The bell rang and I kept drinking, so I wouldn't have to see them again. I swallowed 3 more gulps of water. Surely enough time had passed that I could return to the table and grab my notebook. I shut my eyes for 10 seconds to make extra sure there was no way Jamie was still sitting there waiting for me or something. And when I turned around, the cafeteria was empty. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I am Eric Armstrong, a 4th semester poetry student here at the Solstice MFA program, and I have the distinct honor of introducing Kathleen Aguero. Before I do, I must ask all of you, those here in Arno and those joining us from beyond, to prepare yourselves. Do not be deceived by the woman who will soon be before you. You may underestimate her because of her diminutive stature. She will charm you with kind eyes and a soft voice. Her cherubic face and halo of silver hair will dazzle you. But she is more than she appears. She will summon the dead to a party, as she did in her poem Send Off, or she'll spin language inside out until the tongue gets hands-on quick, like in her poem Makeup Sculpts. Kathleen, my steadfast mentor last fall, once confessed to me during our semester correspondence that despite all the traffic and bustle, she likes being in Salem during the Halloween season, surrounded by all the witchy tourists and costumed fans. I suspect she enjoys eavesdropping on their awe and superstitious speculations. All the while, her magic remains secret. Yes, I mean it. She is magical, making poems, stories, and essay collections materialize before your very eyes. She also, like a fairy godmother, turns tentative pumpkins like myself into MFA graduates. A proper herald would regale you with all her achievements and titles, but I only have a few precious moments before she, or Meg, turns me into a mouse. So here are just a few of her amazing accomplishments. She is an outstanding poet, authoring multiple poetry collections, including World Happiness Index, After That, Daughter of, and more. She has co-edited collections of multicultural literature, such as A Gift of Tongues, Critical Challenges in Contemporary American Poetry, and Ear to the Ground, an anthology of contemporary American poetry. Her many awards include the Furman Houghton Award, Gretchen Warren Award, Rosario Tosielo Award, and the Kellogg Award. She has held various positions like Visiting Research Associate, Brandeis University Women's Studies Research Center, a Massachusetts Fellowship in Poetry, and a Fellowship to the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. And she is a veteran teacher, having taught at Pine Manor College, New York State Young Writers Program at Skidmore, Changing Lives Through Literature, an alternative sentencing program, and most importantly, here at the Solstice MFA program. Please help me summon to the stage the magical, compassionate, and eternal Kathleen Aguero.
Whoops, before I tear the whole thing down. That was a magical introduction. You made me seem so much more than I am. And I really appreciate it. I'm very happy to be reading here. Like Ellen, I want to thank and give kudos to all the student readers. I'm glad to be back here, even though now I'm faculty at large, a title which tickles me because I imagine my photo in a post office, like a criminal. So it's wonderful to be here, Eric. That was an amazing introduction. I always like to begin my readings with a poem by someone else. So I'd like to begin with a poem by Jennifer Martelli from her new book, Psychic Party Under the Bottle Tree. Dr. Martin's 1460 Wild Botanica. What I want is that 8-eye boot with Goodyear welt lines on the sole. I want the backhand, black leather, and the overgrown wild flower print, and all that pink and green flora and fauna. These boots dig in, webbed all over with datura, poppy, Japanese anemone, poison ivy, foxglove, and then the things that feed and crawl and fly, moth, scorpion, black widow, wasp. I'd switch out the factory laces with Loden green, a corset going up each foot to the ankle. I want the crisscross to show. Sometimes I want to smoke again and feel that hot toxin sting the bony roof of my mouth. But I made a vow to never again buy leather. I'd love not to harm any living thing, though I still eat fat shrimp all curled over as if in pain, the sunny yolk inside a warm brown egg. I'll buy eggs just to paint them. I'll smoke bees out of a hive to make honey and wax to burn down all night. I'll call the meat of a cow flesh just to ruin your meal. Here is the truth of these boots. I want you to think they're pretty. Get close to me. Believe me when I say I'm good. And that's Jennifer Martelli. It's sort of a sonnet. She's got the 8 lines set talking about the boots, and then the next 6 lines that begin, I vow I'd never begin to buy leather. So the other poems remind me, in this poem, there's a line from Whitman's Leaves of Grass, which I'm sure you'll know isn't much. Okay. My bad day. What I took to be true love turned out to be a tattered paper doily. Where I expected my reflection, I found yours. What I thought just an hour turned out to be a day, then another and another. A morning protest turned into a slow murder, and the rubber boot lying on the floor stood up like an urn, the ashes of a lost year waiting to be scattered. I thought I was running late, but I was standing still in the rain. What I took to be a mirage turned out to be the world on fire. What I thought was St. Francis was actually a bird bath. What I took to be a fire hydrant was something not even a dog would pee on, and that ghost dog haunted me. The spare rib I pulled from the pot soaking turned out to be a drowned mouse. What I took to be a long wait on a long line turned out to be my life. What I took to be Whitman's handkerchief of the Lord turned out to be astroturf. And what I took to be the end of the road was, in fact, the end of the road. Luckily, thank you. The only true detail is about the mouse in the crock pot. Yeah, if you ever leave your crock pot to soak overnight, put the lid on it. That's my advice. I've been writing a lot of ekphrastic poems lately, and this one was for something. Oh, Bob, you were there too, right? At the Ipswich Art Association, in which you wrote about a poem that was assigned you, and then I think the painters responded too, didn't they? Okay, so this is called this is not a description of the painting. There are a few details of the painting in it, but it's my response to the painting. Seaside Wedding. After the painting, Sultry Beach by K.H. Thayer. The bridesmaids, their dresses belled like upside down flowers, their faces pistils waiting for pollination, walked to the edge of the shore for photographs, their delicate shoes abandoned in a heap like the divorce that eventually followed. But now the beach is empty as the marriage, as the house scrubbed clean and vacant, its occupants moved separately into smaller apartments. The ghost seagulls coming in for a landing just hang. The bridesmaids themselves have grown wary, dresses thinned and faded to old blossoms or long ago given away. The train of the bride's tulle dress transformed into a cloud that hangs like a paper shade over sunlight, and the memory of that day just a bruised smudge along the horizon. Sand smoothed of footprints, not even a plover's small tracks. The guests departed years ago to change into comfortable shoes, their swollen feet propped on their coffee tables. The beach no one will visit again, and the sky, the bruised sky. Thank you. This next one was actually written for something that's at the Menino Center in Hyde Park. I think the reception's the 25th, but the exhibit's now there. It was called Image Then Words, and so you got to pick out something that was in the exhibit, an image, and I chose this one, and then it was a photograph actually on a metallic plate, but it was so beautiful. I really had a hard time writing about it because it was so complete in itself. Dream rooms. One room is dusk, the other high noon, two halves of a day. You wander between them. From where do the stairs descend? And the light sliding down them, illuminating scuff marks, peeling paint. Who carved the elaborate door headers? Yellow light spreads like butter on toast from the lit room onto the hardwood floor of the darker room, the one with lavender through the panes of its closed doors. Inside the brighter room, a large water bottle, then further another door. A new coat of paint obscures history. Past or future, which do you prefer? Rooms of light and angles, the musty smell of one, the fresh paint floor wash of the other. One, the bright self you show to the world, the room open to all. The other, the shadowed, weathered mind you keep to yourself, the one you really live in. You don't need to clap at everyone. It's all right. This poem is called a bop, and that was a form invented by Alpha Michael Weaver, a kind of sonnet. It has the three parts of a sonnet. So you set out the problem of the situation, you elaborate, you kind of resolve it. But the stanzas are different. There are 6, 8, 6, and it has a refrain. And so I have two of those. This is Wild Turkeys. All summer, they've been wounding our tomatoes, leaving me perplexed as I slice scabs off the bottom of each ripe fruit. Then one October morning, I caught them feeding at the trough of the raised beds. To me, they looked like vultures. By the time I'd stepped onto the deck to get a closer look, they'd moved to the lawn, heads bent, pecking at bugs. Then one saw me. The others lifted their heads, stalked slowly toward the railing where I stood. Dark feathers slick, small eyes intent, sharp beaks, spurs. The rafter strutted in unison, a phalanx. To me, they looked like vultures. My head propped white like theirs, throats slackening. Had they come to claim me? I had no reason to feel menaced, positioned high above them. Yet I quickly moved into the house, grateful to shut the door. To me, they looked like vultures. Next poem is another bop, and it was written for a poet friend of mine, Elizabeth McKim. After the 2024 election for Elizabeth McKim. What to do now, I ask my friend. Tunnel, she says, tunnel, and slithers her arms and torso when I look confused. A psychic tunneling? A hiding out? Persephone waiting in the underground? I think about this every day. Tunnel, like the moles that left a trail of ridges in my parents' lawn, soft, squishy, a delight to flatten. Tunnel, like the Holland Tunnel en route to New York. How, I asked my father, do you make such a tunnel without water rushing in, drowning everyone? How safe is a tunnel after all? Show me how to tunnel. I'll devote my aging muscles to the task. I think about this every day. From where to where? Create a vacuum underwater, defeat the river's pressure, tunnel underground. Must you eat the dirt as you move along? Surely someone will spy the soft rising and crush its convex roof. Will we ever see daylight? How long will it take? I think about this every day. I'd like to end with this poem now that there is maybe a kind of ceasefire in Israel and Gaza. I hope that citizens of both countries can have some relief. This poem is modeled after Margaret Wise Brown's book, children's book, Goodnight Moon. Goodnight moon over Gaza. Goodnight moon, goodnight drones, goodnight sobbing, goodnight moans. Goodnight lost paper, pens and books, soccer ball, teddy bear, paints and blocks. Goodnight to the voices that shout in the dark. Goodnight to the rockets, their orange, red arc. Goodnight to the smoke, its choking and stink. Goodnight to erasers, to chalkboard and ink. Goodnight, schoolyard. Goodnight, teachers. Goodnight, body bags carried on stretchers. Goodnight, hospital collapsed by a bomb. Goodnight, someone's leg. Goodnight, someone's arm. Goodnight, shards of glass that sparkle and slice. Goodnight to the moths and goodnight to the flies. Goodnight, shoes without soles. Goodnight, rooms without walls. Goodnight, Gaza City. Goodnight, tent in Rafah. Goodnight, mama's singing. Goodnight, papa's laughter. Good night, muddy water. Good night, moldy bread. Good night to Ahmad's bandaged head. Good night, hungry kitten. Good night, hungry rat. Good night, hungry brother and sister and aunt. Good night to Hein trapped in a car. Good night, my best friend, still my double star. Hungry and thirsty along with her dead. We know nothing about this, the IDF said. Good night, sirens. Good night, cold air. Good night, soldiers everywhere. Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's in the middle.
This one. Yeah.
Good. All right. How's it going?
My semester with Gina Chung as my advisor began right across the street in the parking lot when Meg told me. My first thoughts that went through my mind were awesome. Gina seemed pretty cool at her craft class on Point of View earlier that week, so it should be exciting. And two, now I don't have to take the long trip down to the Solstice office to look on the sheet on the door. Then my mind kind of raced back to that craft class when I realized I said all of 10 words, which consisted mostly of, my name is Louis Lasavita. This is my second semester. Great first impression. With that in my mind, I raced home and searched the internet for any information of what I was to expect this semester from Gina to improve my stellar introduction. I strapped in for some hard research, and after clicking the first link I saw, I read Gina Chung, author of the novel Sea Change, which is a long listed for the Center of Fiction First Novel Prize, a 2023 BNN Discover Pick, an APLA Adult Fiction Honor Book, and a New York Times Most Anticipated Book. Her short story collection, Green Frog, was a Good Morning America Book Buzz pick, named one of NPR's best books of 2024, and long listed for the 2024 New American Voices Award. A recipient for Pushcart Prize, she is a 2021-2022 Center for Fiction / Susan Kumil Emerging Writer Fellow and holds an MFA in fiction from the New School. She is a faculty member at Solstice MFA and creative writing program at LaSalle University, which seems like a pretty cool place. With those amazing accolades added in my mind, I nervously worked towards my first packet. I was worried with what she had to say. I write comical stories, so I was not only scared of what she thought about my plots and characters, but also how she would react to my silly punchlines. When I first got my first response packet, however, it was filled with a lot of helpful information that allowed me to enhance a lot of aspects of my writing. And then on out, she was always available to help me, giving helpful tips and tricks through response papers, emails, and even phone calls. The once big bad Gina Chung wasn't as big and bad as I thought. No offense. In all seriousness, the time that Gina took these past few months really helped me improve my analysis as the 30-page thesis comes looming in, which once seemed like a seemingly monumental task now seems like a lot less threatening. It's going to be a bad day to be a critical thesis, but it's going to be a great night to be here at Solstice because we get to listen to Gina read for us. Everyone give a round of applause for Gina Chung.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Louis, for that introduction. As you all probably know, Louis is pretty hilarious and just a great guy all around. And I had such fun working with you this semester. So thank you for that. And I prefer small and bad, actually. So, all right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Yeah, just those student readings earlier, incredible. I was just wowed in my seat. So you should all feel very proud and excited for yourselves. I'm going to read from the opening of a short story called Presence, which is in my collection Green Frog. And it's kind of a ghost story, as you'll see. After Leo left, I had trouble keeping track of myself. I had just moved into a new apartment, and I felt like I was existing in an endless twilight. I would drift off for a nap in the living room, only to find myself standing in the kitchen, washing a dish I didn't remember using. Or I would leave a cut of meat to defrost in my shining, empty refrigerator and forget it was there for days until the sour smell of old blood dripping into the crisper reached my nose. I lay on my couch and watched car headlights and long shadows chase one another across my ceiling as the hours went by, listening to Billie Holiday and sipping whiskey. Leo had loved Billie Holiday, owned every album she'd ever made on vinyl. I wondered where all those records were now, if they were collecting dust in storage somewhere, or if they were still nestled in the built-in bookshelves in our old apartment. The money from my divorce settlement would last me for a while, but not forever. And although I knew this, had tallied up the remaining numbers in my accounts to determine how long I'd be able to go without seeking new employment, I couldn't bring myself to begin the process of starting afresh. Despite the genericness of my name, Amy Huang, even the most negligent recruiter or hiring manager could find out everything they needed to know about my connections to Nos and its founder with even a cursory Google search. I stared into the abyss of my past accomplishments, listed row by row on a CV that I had once been so pleased about, so proud of compiling, like a house I had laid brick by brick. Now I felt as though I was staring out through the bars of a locked window in that same house, imprisoned by the vestiges of a life that would never be mine again. I ignored all incoming calls, except for Lila's. Lila and I were roommates throughout most of college, and though we were never very close, we had remained in each other's lives long after our relationships with our other friends had faded. We were different enough that we never felt threatened by each other's news or achievements. Lila had a lot of time on her hands, having married a very wealthy man, and she prided herself on knowing just how to use that time. She knew the perfect place for everything, from sunrise yoga to natural wines, and she often posted all about her experiences on the internet. So when Lila told me about a spa she knew of and offered me her upcoming reservation there, I thought, why not? Leo used to say that I never knew when to take a break, that this was one of the things we had in common. And it's true. I always felt guilty whenever we took vacations away from the company, and I have never been a person who enjoys relaxation rituals. But I had also thought I was not the kind of woman who would find herself newly divorced at the age of 36, blocking all unknown numbers and deleting all of her social media profiles to avoid reporters' insistent and aggressive messages, and ordering everything online so she wouldn't run into anyone she knew on the street. So many unprecedented things had already happened to me, I figured. What was one more? The location alone is so worth it, Lila said. It's far away from everything, and there's hardly even phone service out there. It's the perfect place to rest and recharge. Lila was the first person I called when the news about NOS came out, the accusations of falsified lab results, the lawsuits. She flew out to New York City from LA and rubbed my back while I sat numbly in our living room, the room I had so proudly and lovingly decorated. It's not your fault, Amy, she kept repeating soothingly. You didn't know. The drive to the spa would take me about 4 hours, so I left the city hours before sunrise when the traffic was sparse and the sky was still dark. I stopped for coffee and gas at a station along the thruway. I considered keeping my sunglasses on when I entered the convenience store, but decided that I would probably not be recognized up here. The clerk barely looked up from her phone to give me my change, and I relaxed, the coins warm in the palm of my hand. Leo never carried cash, so I was always the one who had to bring it in case we went to a place that didn't take cards. He hated bothering with currency, but I liked having money in my hands, the rustle of green bills and the weight of metal coins in my wallet. We used to joke that it was the immigrant in me, even though I was technically only the child of immigrants. When I got back into the car, the presence was there in the passenger seat. It must have crept in sometime during the drive up or while I was in the gas station. I could practically taste it behind my teeth. It watched me as I took the first few scalding sips of gas station coffee, made no better by the addition of slightly sour milk. My head began to ache the way it usually did around the presence. There was no use in trying to avoid it. Hello, old friend, I said. It did not respond. It never did, no matter how many times I addressed it or implored. I tried to settle my nerves by fiddling with the radio and landed on a country station. I turned it up, a familiar electricity rushing through me when I realized it was a song I had loved once, long before I'd ever met Leo. I sang along to the radio and we continued up the thruway without stopping along the way. The radio continued playing ancient hit after ancient hit as I rolled the windows down, letting the wind whip my hair into a greasy frenzy. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror and noted idly to myself that I was starting to go gray, lines of iron interrupting the long coils of black. The sun rose yellow outside. I wondered what kinds of treatments the spa would offer. Despite the events of the last few months, I finally began to look forward to my stay. I managed to mostly forget that the presence was there, though I continued to feel its magnetic pull. The air grew sharper and the trees grew taller and darker as we wended our way further north, especially once I turned off the main thruway. We passed through small, sleepy towns with names like Cheshire and Hancock, towns that seemed like they hadn't changed at all in the last few decades. The houses grew taller and narrower when we entered Vermont. Picturesque views of peaked roofs, church steeples, and treetops began to appear outside the car. The sound of the radio grew fuzzy and the voices faded in and out behind waves of static. I turned it off and listened to the quiet and the hiss of my tires on the tarmac as I navigated the sloped roads. I could feel the presence pulling at the edges of my consciousness again. My headache sharpened. It was 11:30 a.m. by the time I reached the hidden lane that supposedly led to the spa. I almost missed the gate and had to reverse the car back to it. Welcome to Dripping Pines Spa and Sanatorium, read a small hand-painted sign. Sanatorium? I blinked, and then the letters rearranged themselves to form sanctuary. I was tired from the drive, wired from the coffee, I thought. I prepared myself to step outside of the car to punch in the code that Lila had given me, but the gate slid open without any prompting. I guided the car in through the narrow opening and down the well-paved driveway, which was bordered by trees and white stones. It led to a small lot where I parked. Mine was the only car there beside a blue Honda Civic that I assumed must belong to the proprietor. I walked inside where a fountain burbled in an atrium. The presence followed me as unnervingly patient as always. An unseen diffuser emitted puffs of orange fragrance into the air. Hello? I called. Low tones and chants played softly in the background. You're early, said the woman behind the desk. I had expected a willowy white blonde wearing prayer beads and a caftan, but this woman wore a blazer over a turtleneck, and she was tan, with silvery hair cut into a neat bob, and she was Asian. I had not expected to see another Asian person this far up north. She stared at me over her rimless glasses for a beat too long, and I was wondering if she was thinking the same thing. I can't let you in with that, she said finally. I felt chills rush up to the surface of my skin. No one else I'd ever met before could see the presence. I felt it pulse silently beside me. Please, I said. To my surprise, my eyes filled with tears. I must have been very tired from the drive. I came all this way. I'll pay extra. The woman studied me. Sit down, she said, gesturing toward a rattan stool. I sat and wiped my eyes. She disappeared down a hallway and reemerged with a cup of hot tea. I let it steam my face. It's been with you for quite some time, she said. I can't remove it for you, but it can be contained. I nodded, momentarily blind from the steam. My entire body felt sore. All I wanted was to rest, to lie down, to let the fatigue of the last few months overtake me. I took a sip of the tea. It tasted like ginger and tree bark. You'll have to keep this on during your time here, she said. She slipped a wooden cuff around my right wrist. It was made of a plain, polished, dark wood. That should help somewhat, she said. Rowan is good for protection. I'll show you to your room now. Thank you, I said to her back as I followed her down the halls. She did not reply or turn around. Behind me, I felt the presence trailing me, a discreet distance away. Thank you.
Wow, thank you to all the readers, David Yoo, Kathleen Aguero, and Gina Chung. Trying to move this up while I talk. Can we have another round of applause?